Hello, this is Peter Holmes with Capitalism and Why We Need to Get Over It, Part 2. In Part 1, I set out, as it were, the foundation, the basics and economics behind this critique of capitalism. And now I'm going to go on and sort of develop the story about capitalism and go on to how it works. So, Capitalism and Why We Need to Get Over It, Part 2. Chapter 3. Before capitalism. Capitalism emerged slowly alongside other systems of production. Here are three of the most important. First, slavery. One way to force people to work for you is to own and breed them like animals. You could enslave prisoners in a war or buy slaves in a market. Slavery is very ancient, but as recently as 300 years ago, it provided profits that helped kick-start industrial capitalism. And slavery carries on illegally in some parts of the world today. Capitalist civilization began with barbarism and hypocrisy, and we live with the legacy. Second, feudalism. Under feudalism, most of us were serfs, legally tied to a lord who owned the land. We worked and had servants and soldiers to control us. In theory, the lord owed his power to greater lords further up the hierarchy, ending with the monarch. In fact, the lords struggled with each other and against the monarch, using us to fight their battles. But at root, the struggles were always about the wealth and power that comes from controlling the land and stealing some of our products. The lords often hated each other, but their privilege depended on a system they all agreed on. And the church supported the system because it was also a great landowner. Now, I'd like to break off there just for a minute to digress a little bit on the connection, or rather the nature, of organised religion and its association with the economic systems I've just been talking about, including capitalism. There has been a dreadful collusion. I call it an unholy alliance. And one little example comes from, or can be traced back to, a passage from St. Paul's Epistle to the Romans, chapter 13, verses 1 to 2. I just want to read this because I think it's a lovely example of how religion can be used, and it has definitely been used, to support the economic power of a ruling classes. Here's Romans 13, 1 to 2. Let every soul be subject unto the higher powers, for there is no power but of God. The powers that be are ordained of God. Whosoever therefore resisteth the power, resisteth the ordinance of God. And they that resist shall receive to themselves damnation. I think that's a lovely example. And that has definitely been used over centuries to justify the power of ruling classes, Christian ruling classes. Anyway, back to systems that preceded capitalism. Peasant farming. The word peasant originally meant country dweller. Peasants are small farmers who produce enough to survive, but often little or no surplus. Sometimes they act collectively, but their main interest is land, their source of raw materials for production. Some peasants become richer, but poor peasants and landless labourers still form a large part of the world's population, though capitalist farming is taking over. So that's before capitalism. And now, chapter 4, how capitalism began. The significance of the details of this story and their sequence are disputed, but it went something like this. Capitalism involves making a profit by selling products. Arguably, the first capitalists were merchants who bought and sold products such as spices and slaves. For traders, the rule is buy cheap and sell dear. Making a profit by investing in production rather than just exchanging products began later, arguably. But of course, farmers have always had to hold back some grain to sow next year or raise young stock to replace animals for slaughter. So we've always had to invest products in new production. But production became capitalist when owners paid us to produce for the market and made a profit by selling our products for more than the production costs. The first free producers made things needed for domestic life, agriculture and warfare, as well as finer things for the rich. As production, transport and exchange developed, more of these workers could become independent of lords. Towns grew with trade and production for the market. Rich burghers, which means town dwellers, emerged, and the French for burgher is bourgeois. With growing wealth, the bourgeoisie, meaning capitalists, could challenge the landowners for political control, using us to fight their battles. But farming soon became capitalist as well, with machinery replacing workers, land bought and sold as an investment, and produce sold for profit. Wealthy landers improved by using state power to enclose common land and small plots, driving us into towns to work in factories or abroad. Landowners and industrialists often struggle with each other, but again their power rested on a system they all supported, the emerging capitalist system. So that's by way of background, and here's now chapter 5, how capitalism works. And again I go through in stages. First, wage labour. Capitalists pay us wages in exchange for what we produce, but they pay us less than what they sell our products for in the market, keeping the difference as their profit. And if we notice, we're just supposed to think this is the way things have to be. The homely slogan is, a fair day's work for a fair day's pay. But money just represents products. And in any exchange, if someone forces you to give them more than their products are worth, it is theft. And that is the injustice at the heart of the capitalist system. Beneath its honest appearance, capitalism is legal, organised crime. Now, if this appears an extreme or simply inaccurate description of capitalism, I think that shows how anaesthetised we are, how normal and natural the injustice seems to us. And this is because the injustice is institutional and systemic. Like slave owners and feudal lords before them, capitalists legally profit from our labour. Now, our contract with capitalists is supposed to be free and fair. They don't own us as slaves, and we're not legally tied to them as serfs. But the majority of us have to sell our labour to one capitalist or another, because they own most of the means of production. Capitalist freedom is their freedom to live off or enrich themselves from our labour. Wages will rise, of course, if labour is short, or fall if there are too many of us for the work. But demand usually regulates the labour supply, and some unemployment is always useful for capitalists. If we have to compete for jobs, we'll settle for lower pay. Of course, the aspirational may have a go, employ a few workers, and maybe become the capitalist hero, a self-made success. But that doesn't justify capitalism. Would slavery be justified if any slave could become a slave owner? Or feudalism if any serf could become a feudal lord? So-called social mobility doesn't justify social injustice. Next, capital. Capital is a stock of the products we need to produce other products, and capitalism progresses by expanding and improving means of production, which is a good thing. Capitalism has made some of us much more productive, transforming parts of the world and improving life for many of us. The problem is that a self-interested minority owns what we produce, so we can't decide what to produce and how to use it. Because we can sell any possession and invest the money in production, sometimes any asset, such as a home or a car, is called capital. So we're all potentially capitalists. But this is just a con to make us feel part of their system. Next, kinds of capital. There is only one kind of capital, means of production. But merchants trade products for profit, and moneylenders make profits on loans, which we used to call usury. So merchants and moneylenders are in effect capitalists as well. Production capital, such as in factories and offices, is tied down in place and time. The investment tends to be long-term. Merchant investment is more mobile. Traders can buy and sell for shorter-term profits. But money, which only represents products, is the most mobile part of the system. Significantly, the word capital has become a synonym for money, which is convenient for capitalists. After all, if they're just people who have more money than the rest of us, how they get the money, by exploiting us, is less noticeable. The three groups of capitalists, production, merchant and finance, try to profit from each other. There's little love lost between them. But they all rely on us to produce the wealth they carve up. So, if necessary, they unite to maintain their wealth and power, using the states and legal systems developed to maintain capitalism. Next, competition. The relentless competition between capitalists supposedly makes production more efficient. They have to reduce costs and improve products, or rival firms will overtake them. We benefit from more and better products at lower prices, if we can afford them. The supposedly common sense slogan is, competition is good for the consumer. But the pressure to lower costs and increase productivity means we have to compete with each other, here and around the world. Competition, or the threat of it, gives capitalists the power to divide and rule us. In truth, competition is mainly good for capitalists, not the rest of us. Long hours, speed-ups, low pay, wage cuts, redundancies, unemployment, delayed retirement, forced dislocation, and even migration. A relentless and unnecessary struggle is the price we pay for their self-interested competition with each other. Capitalists invest where they can be fairly sure of a profit. If a firm does go under, some may lose money, but most just move their investment elsewhere. Unless there's a major crisis, capitalists organise their competition with each other profitably. And in a crisis, some capitalists profit from the cheap capital the losers have to sell. And if necessary and possible, capitalists use state force to control foreign competition. Millions have died, and until we resist, will continue to die in capitalist wars. Next, accumulation. Capital tends to grow or accumulate because firms invest to stay competitive. For example, more or better machines can make us much more productive. With relentless accumulation, Capitalism has driven the amazing technological changes over the past 200 or 300 years, and we benefit from cheaper, better, and more plentiful products if we can afford them. But we lose when machines or competing firms take our jobs, often breaking up families and communities. The continuing price of capitalism is massive social disruption, and the environmental cost of competitive accumulation for private profit continues to be appalling. Next, concentration. As well as accumulating, capital tends to concentrate as firms grow bigger. Some capitalists compete to take other capitalists' profits, but they don't like competition from rivals. And anyway, the point of the competition is to win. They'd much rather bankrupt rivals or buy them out. And as a firm grows, it has more power to outproduce and undercut competitors, so concentration snowballs. The biggest and most successful firms can invest abroad, becoming multinational corporations. In economic terms, globalization involves the international concentration of capital, and it's nothing new. The power multinationals have to control governments scares some anti-capitalists, as though capitalism is fine if it stays inside state borders. But the problem is capitalism itself. Multinationals are just big-time legal organised criminal syndicates. Next, crises. Crises occur when capitalists rush to invest where they can make the most money. As they invest in a profitable industry, the competition increases and profits fall. If supply rises above demand, there's a crisis of overproduction. Then they sack us until demand and the normal profits return. We may still need the products, but if capitalists can't make a profit selling them, they won't let us make them. Capitalist self-interest causes this roller coaster of boom and bust. If the crisis becomes general in many parts of the economy, it becomes a slump, a recession, or even a depression. These can be devastating for us, with poverty and broken families and communities. We're told this is a natural part of the trade cycle. Next, profit and risk. Profit is the surplus left over when capitalists have paid our wages and the other costs of production. But they don't make the profit until they sell the product, so there's a delay between investment and profit. This is the supposed risk for capitalists, and the profit is supposedly their reward. But usually there isn't much risk. Investors expect to make a tidy profit, what they call the normal return on capital. How else could banks offer guaranteed interest on savings? And the rich can move their money around the world to chase profits. The idea that capitalists are all daring risk takers is absurd. They've even invented the name venture capitalist for those who take greater risks. Capitalists prefer to call profit a return or a margin. Perhaps to profit from other people's labour, relative poverty, or even misery doesn't sound too good. In this context, profit is a dirty word for a reason. Under capitalism, production is for private profit, not to meet everyone's needs directly and equally. That's why it doesn't. Next, stocks and shares. Our products are commodities. Capitalists can trade with each other to make more profits. They buy and sell stocks of our products, regardless of the consequences for us. They buy company shares to benefit from our labour, and in the futures market they gamble on price changes. As a final insult, they invest our pension funds in stocks and shares, using our own products in the form of savings, to exploit us all over again. An enormous finance industry has grown up on the back of our labour. Money swirls around the money in the money markets. It's hard to grasp that the whole circus exists to exploit us and steal what we produce. Next, factor rewards, price components. The price of a commodity supposedly consists of a payment or reward for the three factors of production: rent for land, interest for capital, and wages for labour. But the rewards to land and capital have nothing to do with their productivity, because they aren't productive. They exist only because some people own productive land and capital, and so can force the rest of us to work for them. The factor rewards idea is designed to disguise this. Next, the market. The market is the homely idea at the heart of the capitalist fairy tale we're brought up to believe in. Here's how it goes. Each of us plays two parts: the producer and the consumer. We bring our products to market and exchange them fairly with each other. We are free to sell and buy, exchanging products as we choose. When we buy, we create the demand that regulates supply and prices, organising social production in the most efficient way. This fairy tale, like all myths, is simple and powerful, but it's a lie. Most of us are not free to produce what we want. We don't own what we produce, and we don't all come to the market with the same power to buy what we need and want, and so regulate supply and prices in everyone's interest equally. Of course, there are and will always be independent producers who sell their own products in the market. But the economy is dominated by capitalist firms that can outproduce and undercut them with economies of scale. In truth, the market is where we buy back what we can afford of some of the products capitalists have made us produce, and where they make their profit from our labour. The fairy tale disguises the exploitation and theft that occur before we even get to the market. Homeliness is one aspect of the market myth, but it can also be scary. We're told there are market forces none of us can resist. The very word forces suggests they're like forces of nature, impersonal, often unpredictable, and sometimes destructive. We're supposed to believe that production and the economy can never be under social control, but this is not true. It's the greed and fear of competing capitalists that causes booms and busts. There's nothing natural or inevitable about it. Next, Adam Smith. The patron saint of capitalism, Adam Smith, put together the details of the capitalist fairy tale in The Wealth of Nations, 1776. Since then, economists have elaborated more or less fruitlessly on how capitalism works and how to improve it. The phrase hidden hand neatly sums up Smith's central idea. Capitalism is providential. Without knowing it, pursuing our own little self-interests, we create wealth for everyone in the most efficient way. Smith was aware of the dark side, for example, the ruthlessness of capitalists, but he believed the light would, or at least could, triumph. He was a man of his time and social class. The time was the Enlightenment. Okay, so that's the end of Capitalism and How to Get Over It Part 2. I hope you enjoyed it. Please leave comments if you want to, and I hope to see you again. Bye-bye.